Hello fellow Unreal Engine artists, designers and developers, and welcome to the latest episode on creating an automatic landscape material. In this episode we'll add a snow layer to our landscape and look at some new techniques for creating masks based on height and noise. Let's get straight into it. Welcome back to the landscape material series. In the last episode we created our 4-layer landscape. You can see an example on the screen here, and your master material should look something like this, with the masks on the left hand side, our 4 different layers, our blend of those 4 material layers to the final output. So in today's episode we're going to add a 5th layer to allow snow to be put on top of the peaks, and this will be using a combination of 3 different techniques. We'll use a slope mask like we did for the other layers. We'll also use a height mask so that we can decide where it starts, which elevation it starts at, so that's a new technique. And we'll also use a noise mask to break up the snow and expose the cliff underneath, just to give it a little bit more variety and reality. So first thing we need to do is get a texture for our snow. So if you follow the link in the description below, and also I always say this at the start of each tutorial, if you haven't got to this point, follow the links in the playlist below so you can build the material up to the point we've got to. With that said, let's download the texture for the snow. So again, in the description you'll see a link to a fab asset. It's called Windswept Snow. So follow that link, add it to your library, then come back to the project, go into fab, go into your library, and it should appear in there. Sometimes it takes a second to update, so if necessary come out of your project and go back in to get it to update. I might do that right now and then I'll be back with you. Okay, I restarted the project, went back into fab and my library, and there's the fresh windswept snow. So click on that. We're usually using medium quality, so make sure that's what you set it to. Click to add to project, and after a short delay while it downloads the textures, you should find the textures and the material in your project. And as we always do here, let's just do a Ctrl+Shift+S, and that will save all those new assets in the project. So back in our master material, we're first going to create a new layer with the snow texture. So go to the last layer we created here, which was our cliff layer, and I will select that, Ctrl+C, and in the empty space below I will paste a new layer, and we'll go through and set that up very similar to what we did in the last episode. So I'm going to name the comment, and then I'm going to go through each of the parameters with F2, renaming cliff to snow. And the last one here. And then I'm going to go through them again, and I'm going to assign a new group. So we're going to create a new group here called 5 snow, and then make sure the other 3 parameters here are assigned to that group. And now, just to test it out, let's zoom out here and connect actually the material output here we need to change as well. So go to the reroute node here and change that to snow material. And to test this out, what we can do is go up to our final output here, right click somewhere in empty space, search for snow material, and let's plug that into the main output to see what it looks like. Click on save. Let's go back here, and you can see at the moment it's using our grid textures. That's pretty much what it does by default. Over on the material instance, so make sure you've got your material instance opened up for the landscape, you'll have the parameters for snow. So go to the default ones for the texture and normal. Let's start off with the base color, snow, and choose the base color. And for the normal, again type in snow and choose the normal. And you can see we have some lovely looking windswept snow all over our landscape. So now we're ready to create the mask so that that snow only appears in the peaks. So let's start creating our snow mask in the same area of the material where we created our other masks. So underneath the ground, mid-low and mid-high slope masks, find a bit of empty space. And we'll start off with creating a basic slope mask for the snow. So right click and do slope mask. And we are going to use some inputs for this. So let's steal the mid-high slope constraint. So Control D to duplicate it. And let's call it snow slope constraint. And over here, make sure it's assigned to the snow group. Let's plug that into our fall off power, just like the other ones. And let's add a named reroute mode, if I can say it. Add a named reroute node on the way out. And I'll call that snow. I'm not going to call it snow slope mask because we're going to add other things to the mask as well. So let's just call it snow mask. And make it our usual purple color. Just for fun, we'll add another parameter here as well. We've left all the other parameters empty on these. Let's play with the contrast for the slope as well. So if you duplicate your parameter here, let's create one called snow slope contrast. Let's default that to a contrast value of 1 and plug that in here and just see what that does. Okay, so that's our mask. Let's quickly test this out. If we go over to our output, so let's take the output of the 4 layers that we've mixed together so far, do another blend material attributes. We'll plug in our snow material and we will right click and select our snow mask as the blending between those, and then we can plug that into the final output. And if we click on save, let's see what we've got. So we've got snow, but it's at the bottom of that valley. That's probably because of our slope constraint. So we need to scroll down our material instance and we will change the snow slope constraint to 0. So you can see now that the snow is everywhere on the landscape. If we change that, you can see that the slope changes here. So we've got the first part of our mask, which is the sort of standard slope. So the next thing, let's play with the contrast as well. So if we make the contrast 0, you see it's soft and you can see some snow on the cliffs. If we put it back to 1, there's a differentiation between those two textures. If we make it 2 or 3, it just hardens the edges of those lines where the textures meet. So it gives us a bit more control. And you can add those to the other layers as well if you want, although it's probably not necessary for what we're doing. So now we've got the slope, let's move on and do the next bit of the mask, which is the height mask. So I only want snow to appear over a certain height. So here I am back in the mask material, back on the snow mask. Now this is going to get quite big once we've added the height mask and the noise mask here. So rather than do this all in the master material, let's collapse it to a material function and we can do it there just to keep it cleaner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the 3 nodes that lead to the output and right click and do collapse to function. Double click on our material functions folder and create a new function called mf snow mask. And you can see now our mask in the main material is just as simple as that. And we can just put a comment around here and say snow mask. Now it should have opened up the material function, so make sure that's on your main screen, and you can see that it's the same as we saw before. For the output, let's give it an output name of snow mask, and let's put a comment around this bit here and say slope mask. Okay, now we want to work on the height mask. So let's go into the empty space underneath and think about how you can mask by height. So we've used the landscape coordinates before to see where we were in the landscape on the X and Y axes. Now what we want to do is we want to see where we are on the Z axis. So there is a node called world position, and that tells you where you are on the X, Y and Z position, and you can see that it has different outputs. We're interested in this output for the Z height, and we want to set a cutoff for where the snow appears. So let's set up a parameter, and we'll right click on here, duplicate it, and we'll call this snow start height. So that will be and let's put a default value of 0, which is sea level at most landscapes. So if we take this height here and we subtract this height, anything positive will be where we want snow to appear, and anything negative will be where we don't want snow to appear. So let's just do that. Take that out, hit the minus button for subtract, and subtract the parameter here, and that is now a mask for where you want the height to appear. So let's drag a comment around here and call this height mask. So we already have a slope mask up here. We want to combine the two, so we only want it to appear above a certain height, and we only want to appear it on a certain slope. So to do that, to combine two masks, it's very simple. You simply multiply them together. So use a multiply node here, and wherever that mask has a 1 in it and this mask has a 1 in it, it'll appear. If either of the two masks has a 0, it will stop the other part of the mask appearing. So it'll effectively combine them. And let's now put that into the output. And let's do a test. So click on save. We have to save the master landscape as well to apply it, because it needs to put that material function in. Okay, and now if we go back here, you can see that we have nothing below a certain value. Let's do the snow start height here. This height map is actually quite low. I think the sea level is sort of about at the top of the peak, so we'll need a minus value to change the height. But you can see if I put minus 10,000 or minus 20,000, it brings it down. So minus 10,000. And there are some strange artifacts going on here, sort of black. So let's have a look at why that might be. Let's go back to our snow mask. So at the moment, the values here are in the thousands because we're subtracting from our start height. So if our world position is 10,000 and we subtract 0, we've got 10,000. So actually our mask is not between 0 and 1. So to make sure that this value is between 0 and 1, we'll use a node called saturate. It's a bit of a strange name, and if you see some tutorials, you'll see people saying clamp the value between 0 and 1. That's all this does. If I hover over it and you see the description, it says clamps the value between 0 and 1. And the good thing is that most graphics cards do this pretty much for free. so it doesn't cost anything. So that will now clamp these values between 0 and 1, and then when we do the multiply, it will always between 0 and 1. So save that, come back to our landscape, and there we go. We've now got our landscape back underneath, because the mask is properly constrained. And let's go back to the parameters here. Let's make the slope constraint 0, so it's snow everywhere. And now you can see that when I change the height, you get a very harsh cutoff. So I've put in minus 5,000 here, 0 on the slope constraint. Doesn't look very realistic, because in real life you don't get those harsh cutoffs. So next thing we want to do is make our height mask blend between the where the snow is and where we don't want the snow. So let's go back to the snow mask and think about how we can do the smooth transition. So as I said before, when we're subtracting these two, we're getting values in the thousands as it goes further up, and negative below there. So for example, if our position is 1,000 and our start height is 0, this value is going to give 1,000. So what we could do is we could divide the output of this by a number in order to make the 0 and make this 0 to 10,000 appear within 0 to 1. So say if we divided it by 10,000 in that example, it would make the 10,000 coordinate here 1 and the 0 coordinate 0, and we'd effectively be blending or transitioning from 0 to 10,000. So hopefully that's not too confusing for you. Nearly confused myself there. But if we, after the subtract, if we do a divide, and we will create a new parameter, and we'll call it snow transition. And we'll give it a value of something like 1,000 by default. So this means it will do the blend within 1,000 units, and we'll divide that before feeding it into the saturate node and clamping it. And if we now come back to the landscape, you can already see that there is a slight smoothing. So it's where that was 0 to 1 meter, it's now taking 0 to 1,000, 0 to 1 centimeter. Now it's taking 0 to 1,000 centimeters and collapsing it down, so that that's the mask transition. And we can now change that. So we make that 1,000 5,000. You can see that it now blends over 5,000 units. If we put it back down to 0, we get that harsh transition again. So I'm going to put it back to 5,000, and if we now combine this with the slope constraint, you can see now we have snow that is constrained by the slope, but it also smoothly blends at that height into the landscape below. So let's just, before we do the last part of the mask, let's just sort these parameters. So I want the slope constraint. In fact, I've got it the right way. I've got the slope constraint and contrast and the start height and transition. So let's just put the right priorities in there so that it's organized. So let's start with slope constraint, and I'm going to do 6 for this because it's the 6th. Oh no, sorry, it is the 5th parameter in our group. My mistake. The next one I'm going to make 6. The snow start height 7. And the snow transition is sort order 8. So in my material instance, I've changed the slope constraint to 0.8 on the material instance, so that we get these sort of big swathes of snow going up the mountains here. What it would be nice is if we could use some noise to break up these large swathes of snow so that you can see the cliff underneath. That's more realistic way that snow sits on the landscape. So the first thing we need to do in order to add that to our mask is actually have a noise mask image that we can use. So I've created one for you that you can download. The link is in the description below. So first thing we need to do is import that. So go to your content browser and let's go into materials, and let's actually create a new folder here called textures. Double click here, and if you actually just click the import button up here and go to where you've downloaded it, and you get this snow edge noise here, and do a Control-Shift-S now to save everything. And if you open that up, you can see that it's a basic noise texture. We only really need to use one channel of this, doesn't really matter which one, in order to drive a sort of a black and white mask of where we want the snow to appear and disappear. So let's close that back down again. Go back into your material function for the snow mask, and we're going to add a third element to this mask. We've done the slope, we've done the height. Let's do a noise mask element. So let's go over here a bit and right click and do texture sample, and then in your texture sample details here, choose the snow edge mask that you've just taken in. And the first thing we want to do is decide how we want to tile this. And you remember when we did the tiling textures on the landscape, we need to take the landscape coordinates and then divide them by a tiling amount. So let's take the output from here and divide and plug that into the UVs for tiling, and we will steal the last parameter we did over here, the snow transition, plug that into our divide, and let's call this snow edge noise tiling. And the starting value might be something like 64, something like that. We'll be able to change it, so we'll see what that's like. So we now have this edge noise here, and just like we did with the other two elements of the mask, we need to take what we've got already and multiply it with this noise mask. So you only need one channel of this, so let's take the red channel and then put that in the output. And let's save that and have a look and see what's happened here. And you might be able to notice it's quite a subtle effect here, but our large swathes of snow here that were in one solid block are now broken up by the tiling. So if we change the tiling amount, I mean, put it down to something like 32, and you can see that it's a finer noise, and put it up to 128 or 256, and you can see that it's broader brush strokes there. So let's go, I'll put it back to 128. That was quite a nice intermediate value here. It's quite a subtle effect here, so it'd be nice if we can have some controls to harden the contrast between those two elements. So let's go back to the mask, and we will add another option here. What we can do is from our output here, we can change the contrast of that node. You can see that it's not particularly sort of a harsh gradient between the black and the white values, so we can use a contrast control to make it more contrasty. So let's take the output here and type in cheap contrasts, and we can have a parameter that drives that. So let's duplicate this one and we'll call it snow edge contrast. Give it a default value of 1 for contrast and stick that in here, and then we'll stick the output in the multiply here. Move it along a little bit more. Okay, so now we have a contrast controller, so let's test that out. Save here, and you can see even with a contrast of 1 here, you now see the patterns much more markedly between where the noise is and where it isn't. So let's change the slope constraint back to 0. Actually, yeah, 0, so that we don't have any slope constraint at all. And you can see now that it's quite harsh contrasts. There's the snow edge contrast here. If I make it 0, then you can see there's a very faint differentiation between the snow and the cliff underneath. If I make it 1, it's harder. If I make it 2, 3, 4, it hardens it a bit more. So even with an edge contrast of 0 here, we can still see the edge noise. So we might want another control so that we are sort of switching the edge noise off, or maybe just blending between the snow without the edge noise and the snow with the edge noise. So let's do that as our final feature in the mask. And to do that, what we want to do is we want to have another option here. Let's call it, let's duplicate this, and we'll call this snow edge noise amount. So we want this to be a value between 0 and 1. So let's actually set the default to 0. So there's no edge noise. And what we'll do here is we will simply put a lerp node. That's the last node here, linear interpolate. And what we'll do is we will, if the value here is 0, we'll take the mask as it was before the edge noise. And if the edge noise amount is 1, we'll take the edge noise and plug that in there. So it'll blend between those two. So if we have the edge noise of 1, it'll be the full amount of the edge noise, no edge noise with 0, and then somewhere in between. So we need to plug that into our alpha and that into the output. And let's just tidy these things up here. So let's put a comment around all of these and call it edge noise. Something else we might want to do as well is at the moment you can put in any value in here, but obviously if you put in a value greater than 1, the lerp won't make any difference to the lerp. In fact, it might make it behave in an odd fashion. So let's make sure we clamp this value between 0 and 1, and we've done that before with a saturate node, and then plug that into the alpha there. Okay, so now we can only have values between 0 and 1. Okay, and let's also just sort out the order of the parameters that appear on the screen here. So you can see at the moment I've got the slope constraint and the contrast first, the start height, but then the transition is down here. So I want the start height and the transition to be together, and then I want all of the edge stuff to be together as well. So the start height was priority 7, transition is priority 8. I'll then do the noise amount as number 9, the tiling as 10, and the edge contrast as 11. And let's do a final test. So at the moment we have edge noise amount of 0, so you can see that there is nothing going on there at all. We can change the slope amount to something like 0.7, so that's just applying the slope mask as well. And if we now make the noise amount a value of 1, you can see that it adds noise as well. But if we make it 2 or 3, it shouldn't change. It clamps it. And we can have something in between. So a little bit of noise breakup. So play around with that. I'll make it 1, and we can change the edge contrast to make it harsher. And we can change the tiling size as well to have larger drifts here. So you can play around with these controls now and get a whole host of different effects. So the last thing I want to do in today's episode is have a switch in our material instance so we can decide whether we want to add snow or not. So we haven't done that before, a simple sort of switch parameter that allows us to choose whether to have the layer on or off. So let's come back to the master landscape. And if we go over to the final output here, you can see that this is where we are blending in the snow mask. So what we can do is we can add a parameter here. So I've just created a little bit of space, and what you want to do is search for a static switch, a static bool parameter is what you want. Sorry, not static bool parameter. Sorry, a static switch parameter. And we can rename this. Let's call this add snow, and we can plug in the true and false path that we want through this. So if we want to add snow, then we want the output from here. So that's when we say add snow is true. And if we say add snow false, we want the pre-snow material here. So plug that in there. And in fact, let's just put it up here. So if we don't click add snow, it will ignore this part and just take the output from the previous blend. So in terms of where that add snow appears, let's put it in our snow group, and let's put it as priority 0. We want that to be the first parameter you see here. And the default value at the moment is no snow. So click on save. And what you'll notice, and this is really, I think, very useful, is that in our snow group, we don't see all of the parameters beneath the add snow. And that's because a static switch recognizes when a path hasn't been taken, and it doesn't include any of the parameters in that earlier path. So you can see that when I have add snow as false, there are no parameters. When I click on true, all of the other parameters appear. So this is a really useful feature for keeping these material instances looking clean when you don't actually need to use the layer. So we switch the snow off, we switch the snow on, and then we can change parameters. So that's the end of today's episode. Stay tuned for the next episode in the series. I'm going to be taking a bit of a break for a week or so don't expect the next episode until probably next Friday or Saturday. See you in the next one. Bye for now.